because of COVID, basically. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you guys for joining up. I'm so sorry. There may be I think there may be a few people on a different Zoom link, so I'm gonna take a minute and try to bring them on over here, and then we can get started. And the person who I'm most concerned with is Mary Ann McDonald, who's emailing. So let me see if I can grab her and bring her over, and then we shall get started. Or if somebody can email her. Thank you.
I can do it, Liz.
Oh, thank you. Just send her this link because I think she may be on the other link. In fact,
Okay.
we were there together, so I'm fairly sure she is. So let me say thank you again. A couple of quick updates for people. We're actually right on schedule with our first draft chapters, and they are coming in and they all look remarkable. So just for a minute from where I sit, the book is looking absolutely amazing thanks to the people on this call, and I think we are going to have a great product. We've been discussing kind of some of the more softer side, so there's definitely t-shirts and things to celebrate at the end, and I can't wait for those days to celebrate with this group. While we're getting ourselves together, I wonder, today we're going to have Mina's presentation, and then I would like to add a few more to our schedule. Linda, actually, I was thinking that the group would benefit greatly from just seeing your chapter and where you are so that the information can be integrated, if that's agreeable. So I think we could really benefit from that. And what other announcements do people have for the group?
I was just wondering, the cover email that goes out with the form, who had the last version of that? I remember Lloyd jumped in on it at some point, and I'm just wondering if whoever had the last version could send that out again. DJ does. Okay.
Are we extending the deadline for case studies?
I think we have 23. So I think we maybe should, just to be inclusive.
Yeah, I had a request, so that's great. I can let them know.
Yeah, I saw the thing that went to nursing for June 1st.
Yeah,
That was quite an extension.
Mhm.
I think we're okay just for that. If that is okay for people, it's mostly, well, Linda, were you in the group that's also reading them and scoring?
Me, Linda, not that I know of.
Oh,
No,
yeah,
I just know somebody sent it to me from nursing and said, hey, blah, blah, blah. And so anyway, we already submitted ours, and hopefully,
Oh, I see.
yeah, hopefully it went to Hunter College.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, and we have them, and they look wonderful. I just want to make sure that we get as many as we can and should. And we didn't see, we want to just, as DJ said, send it to the nursing and send it out through the CPSAs and and Liam, I think you had some places, and I know that that it was sent out to the Departments of Public Health, NACHO, their national organization.
So has it been sent to the SEAL committee?
Yes.
It has been sent. Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'll make sure that that is because I might have sent it to. I'll consult with those who may respond rather than higher up.
Yeah, you might want to send it out again or ask again, just so that they know the new deadline.
Yeah, yep, I will.
We might all do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, it would be awful to not recognize deserving projects and organizations, in this process. So
And if there's any particular type of case study that would be particularly welcome, and there may not be at this point, but that might be worth noting.
I agree, Lloyd. And there are that may not be so academic, but nonetheless, they are powerful, which is what's happening with COVID nowadays.
So I think we are collected, and I'd like to have the maximum amount of time to turn the meeting over to Mina Silberberg to talk a little bit about her chapter. And Mina, for your, I'm going to take notes so that you can just attend to the discussion, but we'd also, with everyone's permission, like to record this part of the session, because then we can go back to the recording so that we can hear we can make sure that we've incorporated people's comments. I think Lorene, we recorded hers and it was helpful to be able to go back, because even we're both writing and also attending to your words. So with everyone's permission, I'll do that. So go ahead, Mina, and let you take it from here.
Okay, and I thank you. I really appreciate that. I had pulled out my pad and pen, and not to have to worry about that is great. So thanks in advance to everybody for reading this chapter. Our team has been working hard on it, and I think you happen to catch us at a point where we have a lot of content there, but it's also still a little rough in terms of putting it together. So I think, can everybody see my screen? I tried to get this to the slideshow from the beginning, but it's not doing that, so whatever. But you can see a number of the members of our great team are here today. Trouble. Okay, here we go. Sorry, we're just on delay a little bit. Okay, whoop. Oh, of course. Okay, so in the second edition, the chapter was titled "The Value of Social Networking and Community Engagement." It focused on looking at the importance of social networks in health, the role of social networks in community engagement, which was organized according to the organizational management of community engagement headers from the fourth chapter. And then there was a section on electronic social media and community engagement, including some cautions about their use. In this chapter, we first of all changed the title. We've moved from the value of social networking to understanding social networks, because we think that it's more than just the chapter is about more than just the value. It's also about how do you engage them and so forth. And it's also, there's a focus on the idea that social networks already exist. It's not just us coming in and doing social networking, right? So that's the title change. We tried to add in a lot of examples, and in particular to incorporate examples from outside the United States. I think we have increased attention to social network analysis, although in rereading the chapter this morning, I realized we didn't actually explain what social network analysis is. So that's a place where we have some duplication, and we also have some gaps, as happens at this stage of writing. We also added communities of practice around community engagement as a type of social network, and have a paragraph about that. And I think we have a little more in terms of cautions beyond just cautions around social media, but also recognizing that, social networks can exclude people as well as including people, that social support, can sometimes be controlling as well as enabling. And so a little more on the negative potential. Also, we have described, we may want to do more of this, you can let us know, the way in which socio-political structures shape networks. So we've put that caution in there, right? That if you have a segregated society, then you have segregated networks. And so if you use those networks, again, you're going to be leaving certain people out. And that goes into our last point, which was trying to talk about equity issues and how those are affected by the use of social networks. We didn't have any specific questions, so I'm just gonna open it there for your general feedback. And then these were the additional considerations for the revision overall, but I'll stop there. And I will stop sharing too.
Yeah, I know you had some thoughts, Lloyd. Please,
And
maybe
I
start us off.
first, congratulations to the whole team. This is such an important chapter, and it's and it needed updating. So I really like the work you've done, and I'm going to pick a couple points, but they're more. I want to be clear. They're kind of to add to really excellent work and trying to make it stronger. The one that I had, as someone who hadn't read it for a while, picked up was a framing issue about much of the languages of someone outside a network or a social network, likely a researcher, trying to decide whether or not to connect to it and for what ends. And I found that one probably accurate, but they also a bit concerning, because the frame was, how do I know which networks to use given what my purposes are? And I think a better frame might be, how do we align with networks as academicians, as researchers, as folks interested in health, and which networks to connect with, and how to make sure those alignments are valuable to the members of the network. I think that fits with the field. Just if I think the folks who've been really successful, they've had long-term engagement with their networks. They're not in and out. They may in fact be considered trusted members of their network, but I didn't see that theme of being a trustworthy member of a network as perhaps as strong as it might be. I see Mina nodding her head. Okay, the other one, which I'm going to be a shorter version of the notes I said, which was new to me. I learned it from COVID, and I'm still learning it. Was that there's an overlap between social media, social networks, and games, which I kind of went, huh? But I got it from the COVID community, the folks working in the disaster response, and COVID being viewed as a disaster, that they use games as a way of helping community members realize the choices ahead. And they can do that via social media to let folks know about it, to actually frame the choices and deliberately design the games. And Bobby Milstein of Rethink Health, which of course has CDC roots, is an example of how you can actually set up a game to help communities make choices. And that's a really effective use of technology. You can do it in person, but they didn't have, with COVID, they couldn't. So how you use social media, gaming, and social networks as a way of helping communities decide what they want to do. And they're real live examples that come up in Florida, but I bring up here because for me, that was entirely new, nothing I would ever have thought of. But as the discussions went on, most of our young folks are more used to games than they are even to social media. So this is something that we may want to explore in this book, in this chapter. Let me stop there.
I'm gonna punt that one to Anne because she's our social media expert in the chapter.
I'm not call me a social media expert. Let's just say I write about it, trying to distill what best to reflect in this. I think that's a good point, and it's the so gaming as a tool within the context of social media, and we could certainly talk about that as because we do talk a little bit about what creating an online community, represents, what the enhanced value of it is. So I think it fits nicely. I guess in terms of square inches, so to speak, I'm not thinking that it's going to be a huge piece, but to really talk, but a sentence or two about that being an area that it creates those kinds of of opportunities. So we'll look for to add that. So I think that's a good point. And I think also to your point, which is also why we didn't talk a lot about, specific platforms, is because we don't know what the heck the platforms are going to be like. I mean, I'm not certain Twitter even existed when we wrote the chapter the first time. So we don't want to spend a lot of time there, but, gaming would be an example of something that's novel and up and coming, to the point that we don't know what the next up and coming thing is. But it's just an example that, to look for other ways in which the innovation or novelty can be applied to. Because, I heard a piece this morning, they were talking about how all of the social media companies, VR and AR is going to be where everybody's going to be, and I'm thinking, oh God. So, we may want to even, mention those kinds of things that, that it's a growth area that, we're just putting our stake in the ground saying, pay attention, it creates opportunities, there are cautions about it, blah. So, happy to take other comments.
So
Virginia?
just,
Oh,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
So just quickly, I've been really watching carefully the community partners' use of social media. And so I think it's also important for us to really think about how the community is using social, not just us. There's a lot of private groups, in some of these different platforms where they're communicating information very differently. So for example, with the undocumented community here in Milwaukee, just kind of watching how they're using Facebook Live to get information out directly to the community, really different than how we would use it as an institution. So that's just one quick thing. I think there's also, even if you're not thinking so much about trying to get into every last platform and how, because you're right, they're going to change over time, but I think there are generational effects within the platforms that are probably worth kind of calling out, and sort of how are the different generations using social media differently. So just a couple things with that. The other thing too, I just wanted to mention is, from my own work in social network analysis, I think one of the pushbacks that I got from a reviewer was that it's not truly social network analysis what we were doing. It was really more organizational network analysis. And so, I feel ambivalent about the feedback in some way, because I think it still is describing social networks, and we're still describing individual faculty within those networks. And that's true, but we're really dealing with the partner organizations with some of the work, not necessarily individuals within the community. And so just to throw that out there, that I think social network analysis is also a multi-layered consideration. Individuals, organizations, coalitions, and some of the representatives, or in those networks, may be wearing different hats in different contexts. So just to throw some ideas around that.
Can I want to just build on what Zeno just said, because the other thing that I think, in terms of what is our definition of a social network in this situation, one of the things I was thinking about, we talk about coalitions in this chapter, but at the beginning of the chapter, we describe social networks as more informal, right? I think that was maybe coming from Jim Deering, who's a real coming at this from an SNA perspective. And so I wonder if we want to sort of stake out the way we think about social networks in this context, that they can be informal, but they could also be formal, that they can network individuals, but they can also network organizations. Or do we want to stick with really the idea of informal networks among individuals? I okay. It seems like we have a lot of people. I see a lot of heads were nodding when I said the first one and shaking when I'm saying the second one. So I think maybe we have consensus, but I just want to check in on that. Okay. All right.
Okay. Well, I want to echo what Lloyd mentioned, congratulating the group. Is shaping up very nicely, and this is a very important chapter. I totally agree with that. There are three comments that I want to make. One is that it is important to be inclusive of non-research networks. Lloyd made that point, very compellingly, I think. And if we have learned something under COVID, is the importance of those non-research networks, because as research networks, from my perspective, have failed keeping communities healthy. Certainly, the networks that have been constructed or have been built with that purpose. And communities have taken things on their own hands, thankfully, to better themselves. And there are many examples of that. The second point that I want to make is that the chapter mentions communities of practice, and rightly so. I think that is important to recognize that. But I would strongly recommend that we go beyond that. And beyond that means if we focus also on communities of solutions, which is a notion that the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, for one, has been, pushing for. They have they have been the conveners, for example, of this remarkable international initiative that is called 100 million healthier lives, which is, these are change agents, pursuing this 100 million people living healthier lives by 2020. And they are providing trainings, and they do it with networks. This is, so one thing is practice, and that's once again fine, but we need to go beyond that. And beyond that means now to focus more on solutions, especially under COVID. The last thing is that, I read the chapter and I have been late, chiming into the chapter. Thank you, Mina, for your patience, and to the group as well. But I read it, and I read it with a specific lens of trying to determine whether COVID-19 has been appropriately covered. And not appropriately, that's not the right word. And I felt that the still is very tangential to the critical impact that COVID has had on communities. If I have learned something, lessons learned during COVID is about the critical importance of community engagement. No question about that. The federal government has recognized that, not only NIH, but through DHHS, through many other, federal agencies, and certainly communities themselves have recognized that. And I think that is very important to do more about it, to make it more prominent, because it really, I don't have to tell you, it has impacted us all in profound ways. So those are the three comments, Mina and Anne and others, Liam, who have been, actively participating on this chapter. But thank you again, Mina. You have done a fantastic job bringing us together and moving this forward. I appreciate that.
Hi, Mina and everybody. I'll just echo the compliments and share two thoughts. One a little critical, and so I'll just say it and then apologize first. But I think my impression was there's a potential to read the chapter as reifying the network as a kind of organization. I think Zeno's point is well taken, and I was missing a little bit of the fluidity of and the potential of networks to be less formal. There's a comment in the chat box about quickly organizing social and political movements and activities and protests. And so if it's possible to, one of the ways I was thinking about it was there was both compliment and criticism in the second edition of the spectrum, the from outreach to shared leadership. Some people really liked the idea that there were these varied relationships, and other people objected to some of them, or the idea of a continuum. But I think we really do have more of a continuum in talking about social networks, and we run the risk of making them into a thing. And so to the extent that that can be avoided, or at least noted, that there is some informality, particularly around, that would be helpful. The second thought relates to, Lloyd, thanks for bringing up gaming. When I think about it in this context, I think about experiential learning and our responsibilities to have varied modes of dissemination of information, and how traditionally academics, communities have been frustrated and faulted people in the academy for focusing on scholarly translations and not so much local dissemination. So the extent to which the gaming can also be discussed in terms of an experiential learning opportunity and an alternative mode of sharing data and information, I think that would help expand on that issue, and perhaps help give it resonance to some other important concepts that may be obscured if we just use the label gaming. So thanks, and continued good luck with your progress on this section.
Okay, I have a couple of questions and comments. This is a really hard chapter for community engagement. And so I'm going to just say, you got this, and I appreciate all the work that you put in to date. So my experience is from looking at Chris McCarty. I don't know if you know Chris McCarty's work. He's chair of anthropology at UF. And again, apologies for talking only about CTSA hubs, but he and Kentucky, they have an NCATS grant to look at, it's sort of like a connectome of academics and who works with who and how, these different topics and themes coalesce. But I'm thinking, of course, we don't want to just focus, we want to focus on the non-research components. And I was thinking maybe in addition to, or maybe in place of the connectome that's at the back of the chapter that you've done on Canadian nursing homes, I think it is, if there could be maybe a connectome of the community engagement programs, the academic side, and who's worked with the Department of Health, who's worked with all the safety net collaborators, as people have been mentioning, just to see, we do that at our site, just to see who might work with who. but we're doing all within academia, which is, should not be the focus here, but it would be really cool if we could see a connectome of the number of partners that we've worked with out in the community. The other thing that McCarty does is he looks to see the head count. Like, how do we know the denominator when we're talking about a community? And that's one thing that we always get dinged on. People will say, well, what's your community? Well, you're in this community, you're not in this community. You don't even know how many people there are. It's not like you're working with a, you're not working with a randomized population, or you don't know what your prevalence rates are or whatever. But for principles of community engagement, it doesn't always matter what community we choose, but it would be nice if we could say something in there about the way that we estimate the populations that we serve and that we work with and for. So I was just thinking of those couple of things that I like the fact that we're talking about social networks within the context of community engagement.
I want to jump in and ask a question about that second one. I agree with the denominator thing. I actually have a paper I'm working on that talks about issues in using social network analysis, and it talks specifically about the denominator issue. But I guess I'm feeling like that feels a little granular to me for this chapter. And I just want to make sure that that my thinking about what this chapter is about is I mean, is the same as other people's. I feel like the social network analysis is not even most of the chapter. And so these kind of technical issues around it, maybe, but they could belong maybe in some of the measurement chapter. I don't know, but I want to make sure I will change my thinking if I'm not reflecting.
No, it may be too granular. It may be too granular. I'm just thinking about things like the migrant community or other communities that we work with. And I don't know, it's just another thought based on work I've seen, but cool.
I had a different thought that moves us away a little bit from the social network analysis, if that's okay. And it was a question. Thank you, Zeno. It was a question that somebody had brought to my attention, and I'll bring to this groups as well, that there is one caution with social networking is that it may override some of the community's protective, hang on for just 1 second. Some of the communities they have it overrides, especially some of the more familiar platforms override the filters that communities put in for themselves, because it's coming from often a very trusted person. And I think that's how we found ourselves essentially here today in these echo chambers. And so we have to also maybe address in this chapter how that caution that it can override and perpetuate without any limit or filter on it misinformation in some cases. And so I want to maybe, I didn't see it included, but I think especially I'm on some of the Facebook groups in my community. There was a recent report that the moms group is some of these moms groups are contributing to the anti-vax efforts. It comes in without a filter somehow. And so I think we need to think about that in terms of that type of communication.
Liz, can you say a little more, because filters?
Well, I'll let Mina also respond, but essentially, what people, things in my case on Facebook, but for other people, it's other things, right? So whenever with adolescents, it's the Snapchat or these gaming things, it comes into the individual and overrides their own internal system where they might question something. So there is a function of it that is very persuasive in a way that where you might like think about maybe something that a doctor tells you, or you hear on the news or whatever. You have a certain, you might question it internally, but somehow this information comes into people without that internal filter, because it's coming from your neighbors and your friends, and so it's persuasive in a different way.
I think we all, like you said, we all live in our own echo chamber, and so our social networks are kind of that echo chamber. And with social media, you can do it faster and wider, but it's always been true, right? We all live in our, it's like Pauline Kael said, I don't know how Ronald Reagan won because I don't know anybody who voted for him, like we just live in bubbles. So I think you're right. We need to, that's what you were talking about, right, Liz?
Maybe Jack, if you can say a little bit more about what you wrote, I'm trying to understand more about it.
Yeah, so I think, I love social network analysis. I've done a lot of it, and we utilize it in our High Plains Research Network in Colorado quite a bit. But I think we have to be careful in doing social network analysis, because, the original social network analysis around farmers and diffusion of farming was really to then immediately taken advantage of by implement dealers, grain sellers, and essentially then became the drug rep version of how we disseminate knowledge to physicians. And who are the prominent people who you trust? And wow, as a researcher, I want to know that. So then I only have to find the 5 really cool hot people who can change the neighborhood or the community. And I believe that we're at risk of doing that if, as we do social network analysis, we think about, wow, what's the way we can take advantage of the social network? And I think this chapter should say something about that. The purpose of social network analysis is not so that CTSAs and researchers can take advantage. It's so that the community can build its own network and understand their own process for diffusing information. And I think it's a subtle difference, but I think it's some of the people reading this book are going to be us and our colleagues, and they're going to be like, ooh, let's pay, if I can do a $40,000 social network analysis in this community, I then only have to change 5 people's minds and it will get what I want. And I think, the part of the, it's all us, it's everyone. There's a national.
Nothing about us without us?
No, it's the national research.
All of us.
All of us, which I appreciate, but I worry that sometimes they utilize this type of sort of informal social network analysis to take advantage of groups and get them to do stuff based on, again, that trusted voice without the filter. And they say, well, Dr. Khan does it, so I'm going to do it. Woo, yeah, okay. So I think we just have to be careful as we describe this in this chapter.
I think it's true for the whole book, right? Community engagement in general.
And I'll echo Mina that this is talk about writing for the next 10 years. This chapter is clearly, is the biggest lift. And I think we could never have imagined that we would have found ourselves here. And it's hard to imagine where we'll find ourselves in 10 years from now. This is a masterful thing to try to think about and take on. And I'm glad that we're doing it together. Sergio, did you want to add to this again?
Yes, Liz, again, because I forgot
Always.
two very important points from my perspective. One is social networks to achieve equity. You know, how is a tool, how this tool can be used to, you know, strive for and achieve equity. And the other piece that I felt strongly as I was reading, especially the social media, was or is the digital divide. You know, who are those populations that are not participating and yet can benefit tremendously for these networks. You know, we are working specifically with farm worker communities for COVID, and I can tell you it's amazing that you know, the lack of internet connection, and also that they are not using you know, digital media for things as basic as you know, registering for vaccinations. It's been a failure. I mean, with that population in particularly, and it has contributed to the inequities in vaccine, you know, distribution and uptake. Just those 2 points.
So I think I was on next. I will say this again at the end, but this is an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. Our chapter is going to be so much better, and my thinking's already better. I wanted to, this especially comes out of what Lloyd and Sergio were saying at the beginning, but you know, when I think about the book is sort of, I would say it speaks to practitioners of community engagement, and we often think of those as people who are not in the community, right? They're public health folks or researchers who want to engage with the community. But it seems to me that people, you know, community activists, community leaders are also practitioners of community engagement, right? And I wonder, that's just really hit me in this discussion. And I wonder if we really want to make that an explicit part of who we're talking to. It's anybody who's trying to engage and mobilize a community from inside or outside.
And it would, yeah, Liam, Lloyd, and me, and yes, everyone is saying yes, a very full-hearted, full-throated yes. Liam, go ahead, and then and Lloyd, I think, wants to talk.
Yeah, so I agree. I appreciate hearing the various comments, and it's good to have the different perspectives. And I guess, you know, I'm also hearing kind of this different flow because, you know, on the one hand, these social networks already exist, and we recognize that. And then I've also heard several times on today's call, creating social networks and actively creating them for the purposes of improving health. And so I kind of am trying to, you know, as somebody who, you know, coming from the funder's perspective, look at that and see that that can be a little bit of a risk. But I guess I came into this thinking, like, how is it that we are understanding those interactions at a community level to be more, you know, to have an impact on health. And then I think also, and I know that Anne was very good, but in terms of thinking about the, you know, and this gets to the digital divide that Sergio was bringing up, is that, is it a, you know, and it's more of a question, is it a bad thing necessarily if a group isn't embracing a particular tool? If their social network is more on a spoken word, that is where they're at. And therefore, you know, how is it that we embrace and get to know that is our community, that is our culture. And yes, perhaps there is a systemic policy or infrastructural issue that creates a divide that we need to be thinking about. But again, understanding where our social networks are in terms of their communication approach, and using those tools that are effective for communicating our purposes, not to use them. Jack, I appreciate that. There is sort of the double-edged sword to all of this, but to work with them as partners to have a, to have a positive health impact. So I'll be quiet now.
I think I was next. Yeah.
You are, and
Okay.
we love to hear from you. You never have to be quiet.
Oh,
We love to hear from you.
so 2 quick points. One that we haven't really touched on, but I think we might talk about the value of linking networks as opposed to creating networks. At least the work that we've been doing for years in North Carolina and nationally at the Playbook, there is no community that doesn't have its own networks, its own social structure, its own. You don't need to create them. In fact, to the extent you create them, you're largely maybe causing damage. But what is really helpful is to link networks, or to help the groups decide if they want to link, because there's so many networks that are disconnected and often working in parallel and don't even know it. And that's actually can be one of the values of SNA, is to illustrate that. So a lot of the work we've been doing with Playbook and nationally has been about linking networks and linking efforts. So that's one. The other, and this was an aha for me, I learned in North Carolina, when this, and I put in a note that a few of you have seen, when the state of North Carolina wanted to reach out around vaccine hesitancy and look, how do we do this? Who has the network connections with our disparate groups? They went to a group that worked on turning out people for the census. They didn't go to health or public health. They said, who would know the communities? And it's the voter registration groups, and it's the folks who worked with the communities around census. So my point here is we need to not think this is all about health, and the community engagement is all about health. Of course it's all about the communities and all their issues. And the real pros at this are often folks who are not on this call, are not in academics, are not in public health or healthcare. They're the folks have been doing the census work and the voter registration. So I think, to Mina's earlier question, part of the audience is us drawing from their expertise, but also sharing that expertise and linking those networks with ours. That's it.
Oh, thanks. I'm going to take 1 second to do a principles thing, and then and then I'm going to let Mina respond, since she's organizing this chapter. And I did add some people just to make space, if you haven't spoken, to make sure that you, we get your voice into the conversation. At a principles level, DJ so wisely advised us at the beginning, it's the principles. So elevating it up to that principles level now, maybe we can divide networks, especially since we can't see the future. And for sure we can't, maybe there's kind of personal networks, digital online networks, these types of things that are the larger, broader categories that may have some lessons that were not lessons, but may have the points of discussion that we can highlight in the chapter, so that it's not about Twitter or Facebook, but just how these trusted networks work or don't work, and how we can partner with them. Not, I agree, Jack, of course, not use them, but partner with them, and that, thinking about what that would mean. I mean, one of the things we can do is use information pathways that exist, rather than trying to develop our own information pathways that almost never work. So I think, Mina, we don't want to hand you this kind of so many mixed up things, but maybe if we approach it at that higher level, they'll fall into these larger buckets, and that will make the chapter a little bit easier to organize. So now I thank you for letting me say that. So I wanted to make room for Sarit, Jack, if you wanted to weigh back in, DJ, and Lorene. Go ahead, Deej.
Hey, hi, everybody. I would just wanted to wait to see if there was anything additional. And Mickey, I just saw your comment and it was exactly what I was going to say, that really the community is a form of a network, right? So it could, if you look at a Venn diagram, larger community, and then there's these little networks that different people move in and out of, just like they do move in and out of communities. You're a community with your family, you're a community with your organization, you're a community with your sporting group if you play soccer or whatever. So, and all those people have their own social networks and you might be part of them. So it's all interconnected. So keep that in mind, but knowing that there are these, I guess, mechanisms or platforms that we're talking about that people use in order to connect. So these are just tools that can be used to engage communities. And then we need to keep in mind the principles that we use to do it. And I think that's where this chapter should be centered. And I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And Sarit and then Mickey, Sarit, Mina, and then Mickey. Oh, he's just clapping. Okay, Sarit.
Hi, folks, and I apologize for being AWOL. My personal life has prevented me from being at a lot of these meetings, but I'm happy to jump back in. I've been super self-referentially thinking about the way in which this connects to the dissemination and implementation chapter that we're working on. And one thing that I've been sort of like playing around with and writing about that I'd love to ask folks opinions about those intersections is about we've been conceptualizing dissemination as a form of community participation. A lot of times I think that we think about research like communities participation in research almost exclusively as research participants, as like contributing to the research. And one of the things that is super important to a lot of the communities that we work with, and I mean, I'm thinking specifically right now with some of the work that we do within the trans community, is making sure that ownership of what comes out of research rests within the community, and that dissemination process and control over dissemination is part of research engagement. And so I love this section here about social networks being used proactively to provide health information to the public. I was interested in how you guys, what other folks' ideas were about this concept of dissemination as a form of participation, and whether we could sort of take some of that and dovetail it in the dissemination chapter.
Yeah.
That was a lot.
No, go ahead. No, and there's a lot, people are agreeing with you in the chat, and this is a group that would agree with everything that you just said and would like to build on that. Mina, go ahead.
I didn't really actually have anything else to say except for just thinking about what Sarit just said and reminded me of what Mickey said about the continuum. The continuum, we did get criticized in, Wallerstein criticized us. And I think she was right because of one point on our continuum was outside of what really should be counted as engagement. And so I think we shouldn't make that mistake this time. And along those lines, I would never think that having human subjects as research participants constitutes engagement. I hope we won't do that. So yeah, I think I agree with what Lloyd said. I think dissemination, absolutely the requirement to disseminate back to the community, but also to engage with the community in planning that dissemination is critical. So I'm glad you raised that, and I do think that'll be a link between the chapters.
Yeah, I know we have just less than 5 more minutes, so I wanted to make sure Anne or others, did you want to, or Lorene, to weigh in?
I just wanted to say just one thing, and I hope I'm not being a heretic, but I don't think so, is that, you know, I am not looking at this chapter or this book as something that's a tome for researchers exclusively as the audience. This is for anybody, and whether it's a community member looking to build a network or a community, whatever. So I just wanted to say that out loud, and because this has felt a bit more discussion that's through an academic, you know, lens, and I think it's really important that we not, you know, kind of, let's say, overemphasize that. And the points that have been brought up today, I think, lend themselves to not looking at it through that lens. I just want to say that, you know, out loud. And to Liz's point in the chat, yeah, this has been downloaded by a lot
Millions.
and we are trying to write this not as this is a to-do book for researchers, but this is how anybody and everybody who wants to, you know, engage, you know, we should be able to give everybody something out of this. So just wanted to say that out loud. And this has been a helpful discussion, also kind of broaden our thinking about what should be in here. And thank you for the comment about principles, because it is really easy to get into the weeds.
Right. I was just going to add that, like, the principle to me just seems that regardless of what you're doing in the community, it's important to know your community and know the networks that exist. And that's the foundation. And then the rest of it is where to look for those networks, whether they're organizational, formal, informal, coalitions, or on Facebook. But it's kind of thinking about, you know, if you're developing a community program and you just want to, you know, thinking about what networks are out there that exist that reach that community. So just the breadth of this and the foundation of so much of this exists, you don't need to rebuild it.
And I'll give Mina the last word in this, and thank you again for tackling this mighty chapter.
This was, oh no, thank you so much. This was an amazing discussion. I'm looking forward to the notes and the tape. I just thought I would take advantage of this platform to let you all know that I'm the new director of the Community Engagement Core of our CTSI at Duke. So
that's great. That's wonderful.
How did that happen, Mina?
Well, Ebony, right, I know Mickey's like condolences, right? Ebony Bulwer, the head of our CTSI, decided that she needed to create a new position of a director that was over the existing co-directors, and I don't know, somehow she picked me. That's how that happened.
Well, sounds fascinating, and congratulations, it's great. But it seems like a recognition that the challenge of incorporating engagement across the broader spectrum requires more attention than maybe we've been giving it.
Oh, that's very interesting, because that is part of her thinking, is that really community engagement is too siloed in the CTSI, and she's talking about, for example, creating a community advisory board for the entire CTSI and really trying to infuse principles of engagement across the translation spectrum. I think she's got a really nice vision, and I'm very excited to get the chance to work with her. So, as well as all the other amazing folks that they have over there. I think they've been doing a great job. So.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna post a schedule for the rest of the chapters. Please just let me know if it doesn't work for you, and we will see you guys in just 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all. I'll grab the chat, Mina. Thanks for a very, very rich discussion. Much appreciated. Thanks, Deej. I don't know what happened to Marianne. I think I may have a 12 o'clock. Oh, you're on mute.
I tried. I gave it to her twice.
Yeah, I did too,
and
but I
thought
couldn't
maybe
get
she
her
was
on.
Email because of soccer 18, and then I replied to all on yours. So anyway, good, very, very good discussion. Sorry, I had to leave a couple of times. I have construction going on over here.
Yeah, I did as well, as you could tell. You know, it was really good, and I think it really helped because I don't think that chapter was where it needed to be. So we needed to figure out how to move it thread that needle.
Yeah, yeah. Well done. Talk to you later.
I love you, friend.
You got back at you, my dear. Bye.
I will talk to you later. Bye.